So the rhythmic sat takes a sat motion and transforms it into a tumbling motion by a carefully timed pulse of brake inputs, causing the glider to increasingly shoot towards the ground rather than around the horizon. To do this trick, you need to have a glider capable of it, and I also recommend doing some asymmetric sat and some simple hands up tumbling first to familiarize yourself with the movement.
So I'll be using a bit of terminology to describe orientation relative to the motion of the glider as hands on a clock, where the glider itself is like the center of the clock and your body is the hand. So when you're directly over the glider, you're at 12 o'clock. And when you're directly under the glider, then the normal flying position, you're at 6 o'clock. So this would be 12 o'clock, 1, 2, 3 on the horizon, 4, 5, 6 under the glider, and then so on and so forth. This is going to be useful as in a way to notate when it is safe to use the brake inputs, which is going to be starting at 12 o'clock and ending at 6 o'clock.
The early phases of the rhythmic sat are a little bit harder to visualize as the clock terminology, so instead I focus more on how far above or below the center of the glider gets relative to the horizon, as at this phase of the trick you're mostly going around the glider than over it. You still have points where you are at the highest point above or the lowest point below the glider, though you reference the horizon mostly, and then as you start climbing higher and higher over the glider and you appear to begin to pass over it, that's when the clock coordinate scheme starts to make a little more sense.
So I'm going to play one round of rhythmic at full speed so you can see what the full sequence looks like. And I'm going to be mostly quiet so you can listen to the noise and just narrate only the brake inputs that I'm using, which is just with the right hand. So starting off, starts with a sat. Pull, release, pull, shoot, pull, shoot, pull, shoot, pull, shoot, pull, shoot, pull, shoot. And now I'm vertical.
So to begin, enter a sat like normal, but try to enter kind of gradually and not immediately stand the sat up on its end. Going for like a 30, 45 degree angle or so is a good starting point. From a stabilized sat, pull the brake down and then quickly release it to make the glider shoot towards the ground. Then every time you reach the highest point above the glider, which is when it's lowest below the horizon, you pull the brake again and then release when you are at the lowest point under the glider and it's the highest point on the horizon. What you're looking for is the motion as the glider dips above and below the horizon to help your timing until you begin to pass over the glider and start to lose reference of the horizon momentarily. When you're high over the glider, you start to pay more attention to the sound and the feeling of the glider. You'll notice that in the bottom right corner, I've put a plot of the G-forces that I measured for this video clip, so you can see that when the glider shoots, the G-force is the highest, and the forces wane as you pass over the glider and begin to fall down in the front. I'm going to replay this clip in slow motion so that you can pay attention to the sound and also the plot of the G-forces and the motion of the glider. And I want you to notice that the sound gets most quiet at the same time the G-forces dampen, which is the timing to pull. So here's the same clip again. I'm only going to narrate the pull and shoot phases, and you can listen to the sound. It's going to be lower pitched because of the slow speed. So it's pull, shoot, pull, shoot, pull, shoot, pull, shoot, pull, shoot. And now it's vertical, and you can hear just the noise. And you can also notice the shape of the glider, how it kind of bends and then shoots forward and then it reaches an open position when you pass over the glider. So you can use the sound getting quiet, the feeling of the G-forces reaching a minimum, the feeling, the sensation of the
the world slowing down visually, waiting for that lull before you pull the brake so that you don't pull too early. So the window to use the brake for the rhythmic corrections opens at 12:01 and closes at 5:59, meaning that when the glider is behind you and you are falling down towards the world, that's when you can safely use the brake. If you use it outside of this time, which is anytime the glider is shooting in front of you, even if it's only slightly in front of you, you lose a lot of energy and it can be very dangerous and can cause collapses, even causing you to fall into the lines or into the glider. So it's very important to be conservative with the timing and make sure that you only use the brake when it's behind you. Even though it is possible to use the brake as early as noon and as late as 6, it's better to be conservative and use it inside of those windows. So even if you wait until 1 o'clock to start pulling, and even if you release a little bit before 6, you can still get to a vertical tumbling. It just may require more pumps or using deeper brake inputs to get there, but it'll be much safer and avoid getting a collapse. The worst time is to pull the brake early when you're passing over the glider. It's not great to hold onto the brake too long past the bottom, but it's not as dangerous to hold the brake for a little long as it is to begin adding the brake too early. So the issue of touching the brake too early to cause a collapse gets a lot of attention for good reason, but I also wanted to cover another sticking point that I see gets a lot of people, which isn't so dangerous, but it kind of gets them stuck and unable to progress. And the big mistake that's often made is people hold on for the brake for too long, or they release too slowly, and they end up having a little bit of brake during the shoot, which both steals energy and causes the glider to shoot around the horizon, kind of like a normal sat, rather than shooting at the horizon. And it ends up putting them into kind of an endless rhythmic motion where they can just never get the glider to shoot straight. The main cause of this is being too timid with the release or not anticipating the shoot in time. You need to make sure when you release, you should be completely 100% hands up by 6 o'clock on the dot. And if that means that you're milking every last bit of the brake window, you should be shooting your hand up as absolutely fast as possible to make sure that you have no brake applied whatsoever when the glider wants to shoot. This will help you climb a lot faster. It's especially important in low rhythmic where the sensations are more subtle and it's easy to hold the brake for too long and get stuck. So the last detail I wanted to cover is the weight shift in rhythmic sat. In the beginning, you want to maintain a heavy inside weight shift just like in a normal sat. And for low rhythmic, you're pretty much holding that inside weight shift all the way. As you start to climb higher and higher and get closer to vertical, you're going to need to eventually release that weight shift to neutral. So there's two different strategies and you can choose your favorite. One is as the glider is in the shooting phase, when you release, you can briefly go to a neutral weight shift and then go back to a inside weight shift during the pull, or you can gradually recenter your body as you approach a vertical shoot. If you leave your weight shift all the way in, you're not going to be able to maintain a straight tumbling, and actually you can use your weight shift back and forth instead of brake corrections to maintain a vertical tumbling. And if you don't use a weight shift in the beginning, you're going to struggle to get the glider to shoot the way you want to actually climb. So the safest way to exit a rhythmic sat or any tumbling is through anti-rhythmic, which only requires you to maintain a hands-up position with inside or neutral weight shift until the glider finishes shooting and you eventually end up in a spiral. If you try to add a brake input during anti-rhythmic, you're very likely to miss the time and get a collapse, so the best thing to do is nothing. If at any point you are unsure about your pull timing, or if the glider makes a strange shape or a shoot feels weird, it's better to immediately go to anti-rhythmic and to start over. Most of the time, you can make one or a couple of small mistakes and you start losing some energy before a really catastrophic collapse happens, unless you really grossly miss time and input. So
The conservative thing to do is just start to exit as soon as something doesn't feel right. Later on, once you get really comfortable with your rhythmic timing, you can then learn the stall exit. So if you want to learn the stall exit, you should first have really solid rhythmic timing where you can consistently get to vertical and you're not getting collapses so that you understand where the glider is. The timing for initiating it is the same as the rhythmic pull in that the window opens after you pass 12 o'clock and the window closes to start your exit by around 2 o'clock. If you wait any longer than that, you will not be able to stop the glider and you risk running into it. So you have a very narrow window to initiate the stall and to begin to stop the glider. As you pass over, you begin to stall the glider, and then when you see it starts to stall, you treat it like a dynamic stall where you don't hold the brakes all the way down or it'll stall really violently. You begin to come up and then manage the shooting energy. It's better to overdo it than underdo it by a little bit, but you don't want to just ram the brakes down and sit on them like a SIV style stall, or it can get pretty violent. So let's go through the stall exit motion again in extra slow motion. So just like rhythmic timing, you're waiting until you pass beyond 12 o'clock, and it doesn't have to be exactly at 12. You have a little bit of leeway. You just want to make sure it's not too late. When you start your exit, you want to progressively come onto the brakes to feel the pressure in the glider. And if it's really light pressure, you can go a little bit slower. And if you're already feeling a lot of speed and shooting power in the glider, you can brake a little harder. But you want to start to come down and see the glider begin to stall. And then when it stalls, you can release up a bit, just like in a big dynamic stall, but be ready to catch a secondary shoot if you release it a little too high so you don't get launched towards the glider. You may, before actually doing this for the first time, do a couple practice rounds on camera first where you are shouting to the camera at the moment you would intend to initiate the stall, and then you can go back and check your footage to make sure that you read the timing correctly. So good luck with your training. Remember, it's always better to pull late, release early, and to go hands up if ever you're unsure. Take it slow, train both sides, and you'll get there with time and patience as your mind learns to understand the trick. Good luck, stay safe. See you next time.